Hey, everybody. It is good to be here. And I'm going to tell you one thing. For y'all chat folks, y'all got to keep me awake because I was in LA and trying to keep an East Coast schedule. So I am fighting jet lag. So I'm going to need your energy, even if you're just saying, what up? Jay Bailey, president and CEO of what now, although in the intro, it kind of speaks to the topic investing in new communities. Even when Chick-fil-A and the Accelerator told me about the topic, I had to ask the question, well, what do you mean new communities? As in new built or newly constructed? And Otis Street, how are you, sir? Thank you for keeping me awake, my brother. And I needed some clarity around what did you mean by new communities? And it really kind of cements what I want to talk about today, and that we can never see a community as new communities. As nonprofits, as truth tellers, as world changers, we have got to be focused on the individual. The new communities may be where we invest new, our organization may be new to the community, but there are people that have been there for decades that made the community, and it's almost disingenuous for us to call it new. We got to focus on the individual. Don Roman, I see you in the room. To give you a little context, I'll talk about my journey with the Russell Center. For those that may not be aware of what we're building on the West Side, I got to talk a little bit about the history of the man. And back to how new communities, like the West Side ain't new, guys. So with all the investments that have gone into the West Side, you got to go back 100 years before you can start even talking about even the beginnings of those. When Martin Luther King walked the streets on the West Side, when Lena Horne walked the community around the West Side, Martin Luther King bought his first house on the West Side. Gladys Knight lived on that West Side. Our first Black millionaire, Alonzo Herndon, lived on the West Side. And for some reason, we start to think it's a new community to invest in. No, we've got to honor the great soul that is in that soil and never approach it as this is the Columbus version of empowerment, that we just found America. No, there were people here before you got here. The Russell Center, even Mr. Russell, to give some context and some texture to what we're doing and why we're doing it on the West Side. Herman J. Russell, one of the most prolific entrepreneurs this city has ever produced. You got to think of a Black man with a severe speech impediment who built half of our skyline, integrated the Chamber of Commerce on the city and the state level, underwrote the civil rights movement, had a pool inside his house in the 40s, guys, with a tennis court where a young Dr. Martin Luther King used to go over, spend time and get away and try to figure out how he wanted to change the world. You talk about new communities. There was a time in Atlanta where we had our own Berlin Wall, where the mayor dictated that a physical wall be built on Peyton Road to prevent Black people from even thinking about living north of that street. Well, Mr. Russell and 6 other families bought a cattle farm and built a community for the community, by the community, to give Black people a dignified place to live in this city, for the working class to have a dignified place to surround them with love. And it's no secret that even our mayor today, Keisha Lance Bottoms, grew up in that very same community, Collier Heights, because she was surrounded by people that told her to believe. Mr. Russell, the only real civil unrest we had in Atlanta was during the student movement and Fair Street, where we're located, right across the street becomes Student Movement Boulevard. Otis, you know that well. You went to Clark, Atlanta. Well, it was named that because when 100 students got locked up, they made one phone call and one man bailed them all out, Herman Russell. For the hollow ground that we sit in at the Russell Center, 54,000 square feet, making it the largest of its kind in the world. You've got to put it in context. You got to think of a Black man 74 years ago having the audacity to build a headquarter building that is a full city block wide and 50,000 square feet with his name on it in the Jim Crow segregated racist South. Anybody out there in real estate would understand how hard that is today. He did it 74 years ago. He built that building intentionally in that spot because back then I enjoyed going to the University of Georgia, but my father couldn't have. So students from all over the country were matriculated at Morris Brown, Clark Atlanta, Atlanta University, then Clark College, Morehouse, Spelman, ITC. And he knew that those students that would matriculate needed a physical manifestation. They needed to see what was possible for people that looked like them and brick and mortar. And so he built his headquarter building directly across the street from the AUC, very intentionally. We're not talking about investing in new communities. We absolutely have to respect the culture, the history, the blood, sweat, and tears that has gone into making a community a community. And when we start to think about how we're going to change communities for everybody that's out there, everybody that's looking at doing programming or supporting community, I am going to go ahead and step on some toes because I've done it myself far too often. We think we're that smart to run into a community and tell them what they need. I'm guilty of it myself. However, I'm a firm believer now, you should never build anything for the community without that very same community. And far too often in the nonprofit space, we have so many organizations that aren't owned or controlled by the people that they serve, and they never see one another. And oftentimes what we also do, as we look at platforms and programs and we get really excited about the program, well, too many programs focus on only being informative. What can I put in this book, in this 6-part series, this 2-part boot camp, this 1-day workshop to teach you what you need to know? It's informative. It's sage on a stage. We're the expert. You need to listen. Informative, far too much energy without thinking about being transformative. Far too many programs focus on being informative. Not enough of them focus on being transformative. And to be transformative more than anything else, what you must do is focus on the individual. And why my bio read was wrong, I set you up, Xavier, my bad, but that was kind of intentional. When I inherited the company or the organization, when I was brought on as CEO and president, it was the Russell Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. Well, on its face, entrepreneurship is kind of the study of business. Well, we weren't about the study of business. Lots of people study the business. We have now changed, and if everybody goes out there to russellcenter.org to check out what we're working on, we've changed it to the Russell Innovation Center for Entrepreneurs. And that change was very intentional, and that change was very deliberate. Why? Because our focus, the most powerful cog in the ecosystem of building a business, growing a business, scaling a business, is the individual. I can tell anybody out there, I'll pick on Otis 3 because I know he went to Clark Atlanta University, or any of you guys that may have gone to Spelman or Morehouse, or maybe Howard. Our model is rooted in community, culture, and covenant. And why is that? Because again, I can take a Morehouse man, and it's kind of hard to do this without seeing some faces smiling because I know there's at least one out there. But I can tell you what, this pandemic will end. And at the back end of it, people are going to crave community more than they ever have. And if you've never been to a Spell House homecoming, you need to go because it is the most epic display of Blackness in the universe. I guarantee 1 million people will be at the next Spell House homecoming, and all of us could do a social science experiment. If I went to Morehouse, it would cost me about $50,000 a year to go. If I stayed 4 to 5 years, that means I spent over $200,000 on my education. 70% of my time was spent in the classroom learning to try to get this degree in those 4 or 5 years. But if I went to Spell House homecoming 10 years later, and all of us on this call did a social science experiment and asked 100 alums one question: could you talk for 2 minutes about your experience at Morehouse or Spelman? And what I would guarantee, and I'd put money on, that not a single one of them would bring up a single class that they took. It wasn't about the syllabus that changed their life. She doesn't wear that Spelman sweatshirt. He doesn't have that Morehouse car tag on the back of his car because of just the robust curriculum. It was the community, the culture, the covenant, and how transcendent that is. I went to the University of Georgia, and I don't care how deep the racist or the bigot. If he sees me walking and I say, "Go Dogs," I don't care how deep the racist or the bigot, he's going to say, "Go Dogs" back to me, a person that he may hate. That community and that culture, that covenant of what it means to be a bulldog transcends all of that. So why would we look at transformational change only through the lens of curriculum? Let us start with community, culture, covenant. Wrap it around a world-class curriculum, world-class instructors, rooted in self-confidence, self-esteem, and belief. Part of the construct that we miss so often when we talk about investing in new communities, we want to change these communities by the programs that we bring in, but what we've not done is make sure that those communities believe that better is possible. Part of our job as game changers is to get our community to see value in their own reflection again. See the beauty of where they are right now and in the entrepreneurship space and the business space. Part of our challenge is the only value add proposition for success in our community is how far I can move away from it, rather than seeing how I can invest back in it. At the Russell Center, again, more than just curriculum, we focus on the whole entrepreneur, because here's what I know. If we want to talk about investing in new communities, I'm going to keep going back to that. Let's look at the gems that we have right there in front of us. I think we lose GDP every year because the brilliant ideas that occur and exist on the south side of every town and city in America never reach the marketplace. Because I can tell you this, if you want to talk about innovation and entrepreneurship, find me somebody more innovative on the planet than a single mother with 2 kids making $17,000 a year. The way she thinks, the way she problem solves, her grit, her determination, how she's still able to smile at Christmas time when there's nothing in the refrigerator or under the tree. You tell me that's not the guts, the resilience of an entrepreneur, a business leader, or a CEO. You go over to the West Side and show me a heroin dealer or a crack dealer that's running their game. Don't tell me that young man or that young woman doesn't understand import, export, wholesale, retail, supply, demand, territory, security, customer retention. All with a gun to his head, on one side from his enemy and the police on the other side. And I can guarantee that there's no class at Morehouse, Spelman, Georgia State, or Georgia Tech that taught him or her how to chop dope. They literally built an enterprise out of the mud with no instruction. You can't tell me that is not brilliance. For some reason, people think all the brilliance and all the CEOs and all the engineers and all the scientists occur in Buckhead only. But I know for a fact, the only difference between Bankhead and Buckhead is access, opportunity, and exposure. If we can look at the beauty in our communities that exist right now, rather than seeing it as something that we need to change, and more something we need to tap into, understand, empower, and uplift. And in the beginning of that is giving them not only just a sense of the terms that we use often now as diversity and inclusion. Well, that's all well and good, but I think diversity and inclusion mean very little without some sense of belonging. It's one of the things that we lean on, that the center is a center that's in the community, by the community, for the community, owned by the people that it serves. And I think that component of belonging is where we miss so often, that I literally need to see love when I look in the mirror. I need to look like when I go to an HBCU, I stole your model. So all of my presidents that I know out there, yes, I stole the HBCU model. Why? Because if I'm a freshman and I go to Howard and I look across the campus, the president of the student body looks like me. The president of the college looks like me. The president of the Alphas looks like me. The person running the chess club looks like me. A lot of my professors look like me. And what it does to me is undergirds my knowledge, not just my gut feeling, but my knowing that all things are possible. I see value in my own reflection. So as we start talking about the building blocks of transformative change and investing in new communities, we got to boil it back down to the people. Boiling back down to the people is where we miss so often. We've got all the answers up here, but have never extended it out. And so one of the truths that we have at the center and why we do it this way, Atlanta, for everything that's good about our city, and for anybody that knows me out there, knows that you're not going to find too many people that love this city more than I do. Pretty much every time you see me, I'm in a Braves hat or a Braves jacket or Atlanta something, Hawks this, what have you. I love this city. I was born on Boulevard. but I love our city enough to be honest with her. And for everything good that we have in the Black Mecca, one of the things that hurts me most is we're still the #1 city, the worst city in the country for income inequality. We are the worst city in the country for economic mobility. A child born into poverty in Atlanta, Georgia has less than a 4% chance of reaching the middle class, and that should break our hearts. Because in Atlanta, people get really emotional when you talk about race, but we're gonna have to stop it. The city is 54% Black. And last time I checked, guys, when you look at the city of Atlanta, no one on this chat will be able to point out a single poor white neighborhood. In the Atlanta public school system, there's not one failing majority Latino school. Unfortunately, in this city, when you talk about class, you get race for free. And almost 98% of the poverty looks like me. So if we're afraid to have a conversation about race and moving our city forward, then we're being intellectually disingenuous in our approach to really try to move the needle. We're not having a real conversation. So let's take it head on. And when we say that the Russell Center is there for Black entrepreneurs, Atlanta's home for Black entrepreneurs, because it's hard to realize, guys, that even though we're the Black Mecca, we look at our skyline and show me a building that is owned or controlled by somebody that looks like me. Ask yourselves, when you've walked around the city, gone shopping, done your life, lived your life over the past 6 months outside of somebody's home or their church, when's the last time in Atlanta you walked into a building that was owned by somebody that looked like me? Back to belonging, the thing that I vastly underestimated. Before we were even fully open, before we had even turned all the lights on and all the toilets didn't flush yet, we were still seeing 1,500 to 2,000 people a week walk through our doors. I vastly underestimated the power of belonging. Even before we had our full curriculum, even before we had our plan all together, the vision of what we were building attracted over 6,500 people to join our mailing list before we even knew what we were doing. Because here's what I know. We started an incubator. I scratched that. Maybe an accelerator. I scratched that. We sometimes call it a generator, sure. And when I paneled 1,500 Black entrepreneurs about what was their greatest need, because I live by what I talk about. I'm not going to build a program for people without those people. I thought overwhelmingly the #1 need for Black entrepreneurs and small business owners would be access to capital. But it wasn't. The #1 need was community. And if it's the same for businesses, whatever segment that you try to impact, you've got to think about building the tribe, building the community, building that culture first. It's the community that moves a person. It's the community that inspires a person. Back to that bankhead and bucket, it is what they see that inspires them. If you're in the education space, guys, education means so little without aspiration. If I can't see it, if I've never met a doctor, I will never aspire to be a doctor. If I've never met an engineer, I won't aspire to be an engineer. It's no rocket science. Even Mr. Russell, he started as a plasterer because his dad was a plasterer. You become a doctor because you've seen a doctor. You become a lawyer because you have a pathway to being a lawyer. But if you live your entire existence in a 10 square block area, what do you dream about? What have you seen that actually stimulates your mind to make education even relevant to you? It's a real thing, guys, why we got to focus on the individual, building the community, building the culture. Xavier, how are we looking on time?
You got 15 minutes.
15 minutes?
Yes.
Oh, then we can get back into it, guys. I think we got 15 minutes, but we also have questions and answers, so I'm heard. So I got you. Thank you, Ms. Goins. You're a real friend. Atiba, thank you. So let me, when we talk about like stories and investing in new communities is personal for me. So I'll talk a little bit in these last 15 minutes about my personal journey, how I got from there to here. And a lot of people take all the possessions and the positions. But I was that kid that started my first business at 12. I started, my business at 12, bought my first house at 19, made my first million by the time I was 26. I didn't have good money role models. I blew it. The economy tanked and I was homeless at 28, starting at a 10,000 square foot home and country club in the South to literally living in a 9x9 storage unit on Mountain Industrial Boulevard in Tucker, Georgia. It was there where I had the great epiphany that by the world standards, I had been successful. The cars, the clothes, the houses, and all that cool stuff. I was successful, but I had zero significance. I had done nothing to put a dent in this world. It was about the show of things. But once I started to chase significance, everything changed. And I say that for this reason. Listen to me. This is a family conversation, but hear me on this. Atlanta, the cost of perception is killing our community. The thought that it looks right, but still isn't right. We've got to address that 71% of the Black community in Atlanta, Georgia, is what's considered liquid asset poor. Meaning if they had a $2,000 emergency, we could not satisfy it with our own resources. So I need everybody to just wake up. The new poverty is not just a shack on the west side. The new poverty is living right next door to you in a 5-bedroom brick house with 2 cars in the garage where they don't have $2,000 in the bank. Sure, we see all of the Range Rovers and the Benzes and the Gucci and the Louis Vuitton. But as we start talking about the wealth gap, here's a sobering statistic that came up in a conversation about 8 months ago. The Russell family, love you guys. I don't know if any of you guys are out there, but they're one of the wealthiest Black families in America. But here's the truth. If we made a list when we start talking about investing in new communities, if we made a list of the wealthiest 15 families, wealthiest 20 families in Atlanta, they wouldn't even show up on the list. If we talked about the 50 wealthiest people in Atlanta, nobody that looked like me would show up on the list. The sobering statistic, when I was talking to the family, I said, well, who's the wealthiest family in Atlanta? We all agreed it was the Cox family. Everybody Google the Cox family if you're looking at your phones on the side. Cox family's total net worth is like $43 billion, $14 billion. I mean, it's some exorbitant amount of money. The Cox family owns Cox Communications. But the numbers break down like this, that if you took every asset of every Black family, every Black individual in Atlanta, their houses, their cars, the hat, the shoes on their feet right now, every stock, bond, car, you name it, put all of them in a bucket, including Tyler Perry, the Russells, and T.I., put all of us in Metro Atlanta in a bucket, our combined net worth, the Cox family could cut a check and buy out the entire Black community and still be wealthy. One family, one check, our entire collective net worth. It's a sobering statistic to really identify how very powerful the wealth gap is. But where the hope lies is that if Atlanta is a Ferrari, then the Black community is the gas. That our ideas matter, our culture matters, our swagger matters. They've built billion-dollar industries just on the influence that we have. Shout out to Bane Joyner, one of our Russell stakeholders. Atlanta does, in fact, influence everything. And here's what I know, to not end on the somber, I'm coming back to you in the end. We start talking about investing in new communities, about the possibilities of Atlanta. I spent significant time on the Silicon Valley side of things, the West Coast. Some of my earliest funders, LinkedIn, PayPal, Facebook, all of these people at the Russell Center, where we've raised a little over $34 million in just 2 years. But when I was spending time on the West Coast with my friends, they got their own culture. They got their own thing. Google, LinkedIn, PayPal, their own culture. They do things their own way. You're not going to find a sport coat or a 3-piece suit. I love what they're doing in Silicon Valley. I love what they're doing in the Research Triangle, UNC and Duke. I married a Dookie, and so yes, I'm very aware of what they have going on there. Love what they're doing with Harvard and MIT up in Cambridge. They've been doing it for over 100 years. They've got a big push in Nashville, a big push in Greenville, South Carolina. Love what they're doing in Austin, Texas. But I can guarantee you this, not any of those cities or regions that I talked about is Atlanta or anywhere as cool as who we are. Where else can you go from Ambassador Andrew Young to Andre 3000, where we had the civil rights movement and soul food? Literally, Atlanta has more enrolled college students in Atlanta, Georgia than any other city on the planet. We are the pipeline. And what I can also tell you, Silicon Valley, Cambridge, Research Triangle, Nashville, Asheville, Austin, Greenville, all of them generating billions of dollars of economic energy. Not a single one of them has gotten diversity right. None of them have made innovation inclusive. With all of their economic energy, all of their power, all of their resources, all of their billions of dollars, they've not made it right for Black and brown folks. And what I'm telling you guys is you talk about investing in new communities. Atlanta is uniquely positioned to get it right. And if you think it's by coincidence that Apple and Microsoft and Airbnb and Google, all of these companies making big investments in Atlanta, the asset we have is, yes, logistics, but it's also our melanin. It is the diversity that is here that we take for granted that does not exist anywhere else in the world. So what can we do to start capitalizing and mining our own talent before others just come in and strip it bare? Entrepreneurship, small business, but even your organizations that serve others, how can you maximize the power that you have in your own reach? But then when you maximize the power that you have in your own reach, when there's a talent in the organization that you're working with that may eclipse your capacity to help them grow and scale, let's love each other enough to make the phone call to maybe another organization that can take them from where you've taken them to that very next step. Take down these silos, start collaborating. Mr. Russell, one of his famous sayings is collaboration beats competition every day of the week. I'm going to tell you definitively, we have everything that we need in the community. It worked before. We've already run this play. You know, we've already shown this movie before. They've already done it. When you used to graduate from Clark Atlanta, you married your sweetheart from Morris Brown and you moved over into Vine City, Washington Park, just like it happened. And those communities over there used to be very similar to Emory because we had it working in our communities. Why can't we go back to it? That we're enough, that our communities are enough to reinvest in, to be a part of. My wife and I were very proud that we just went back, researched, and found the house that her grandmother grew up in on what used to be Ashby Street, where she grew up, graduated from Washington High, and attended Morris Brown, and then bought another house in that very same neighborhood. We've been able to go back, find those houses, do the historical research, and acquire them both. Gentrification works both ways. It can be the way where, yes, our people reinvest in our people, these new communities where old communities become new again, not with different faces, but more empowered faces, more committed faces, faces where we see honor and pride and love in our own reflection, and it can go both ways. And I hope with what we're doing with the Russell Center starts to actually launch this inertia. We see it with things like the Gathering Spot right down the block, the Russell Center, the AUC, Castleberry Hill. Atlanta start thinking about how we can do this the right way under our own power. Tell me what we need if we got each other. Not a thing. I don't think there's any such thing as a new community, especially when we're talking about us. New communities have been there for a while, but you know what? We knew the lines. You know, we've seen this play before. We just forgot our lines. If we find the script, we had it before. We just forgot our lines. And if we could dust that script off once again and figure out how we can love one another again, how we can collaborate with one another again, how we can start to look and see the best in one another again, how we can see the value in each of our organizations, not as competition. But as I look at the landscape of companies out there, not a single one of us has enough juice to actually solve all the problems in our community. So why should we act like that when we're going after dollars, or we're going after vendors, or we're going after people? Not a single one of us, maxed out to the gills, could even put a singular dent in the big problems that we have. We're going to need each other more than ever. One thing that I know is that this pandemic will end. Some of the racial tensions that we're feeling all over the country, I hope will quell. But at the back end of all of that, we're going to need more than just symbols of hope. We're going to need institutions that manufacture it. people are going to crave community after this more maybe than they have in any of our lifetimes. One of the things the pandemic showed us more than ever is that we need each other. We crave each other. To be separated from our friends and our family helped us reset how very much community played a role in our life when it was stripped away. I hope we keep that same energy as we go back into a more normal world and we start reimagining what community means. Can we redefine it rather than reinvesting in a new community? Let's redefine the one that we already have. So it's where my truth is, where my passion is. And shame on all of us, everybody on this call, and I don't know all the people that are here, but shame on us if we don't come together right now in this period of time, because guess what, guys? We are living in a very unique little window right now where the whole world seems to have all of a sudden woke up and realized that the world ain't fair. Black folks were in an economic pandemic before COVID-19. But now that the whole world is listening around diversity, let's come together now and make some real change. The kind of change that isn't a fad or a trend, it's systemic. We need to develop systems that combat the systems that have held our communities back. And as we start thinking about generations yet unborn, some of it we won't see in our lifetime. But I'll end with this. Part of my personal mantra, many people have heard it, build as we climb, is my personal motto. Lots of people say lifting as we climb, but lifting and requires me to be there to lift you over that wall. If I build a staircase, generations that I'll never meet will be able to go over that wall, even if I'm not there. So I'll leave you with this as we start to think about investing in new communities. Plant seeds. Plant seeds. Plant seeds that will grow trees whose shade you may never sit under. Plant seeds that will grow trees whose shade you may never sit under. I'm sitting here right now as the president and CEO of the H.J. Russell Innovation Center for Entrepreneurs. That was born of a man's legacy, born right here in Atlanta. And how could he have possibly known 30, 40, 60 years ago that the ripples that he created would still live on today? He planted seeds, and he's inspired me to do the same. And I hope in some small way during this small TED Talk that I've inspired you to do that as well, looking beyond yourself and looking through people, to people, and thinking how we all can impact 7 generations yet unborn. The work we do right now can potentially change the life of someone we'll never meet, but it's the work worth doing. It's the work that's necessary, and our time is now. Thank you so much.